Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Um, Welcome to another fine Wednesday morning here in the city of Philadelphia. Welcome to another coffee break chat. I'm your host, James Jackson, executive producer, Light Thief Productions, he, they pronouns. And we've got a show for you today. Hopefully, we'll get our guest on. We're having a little trouble getting our guest to join us this morning. Technology, it's a fascinating thing. I've been doing live streams, events, what have you, for the better part of, I don't know, 5 years, let's say, as live streams. I've been doing events a lot longer, but doing live streams and the technology has taken massive leaps in the past year. However, that doesn't come with its problems. The problem with technology taking massive leaps is that as products come out on the market, the typical way of dealing with programming and releasing products nowadays is to release something and then fix it incessantly. Just release it, just get it out there on the market. It's got to be out there. It's got to be in the space, etc. And then we'll fix it. It's a we'll take bug reports and what have you. Anyway, what it results in is nothing out there. It's really quite reliable enough for when people want things to work um, without there being any sort of problems or issues or anything like that. Right now, it's just something that happens. You can end up with uh, something going wrong and not really have any control over it. At any rate, looks like we do have Rick joining us. We'll see him in a minute. And some other things we're going to cover today. White and Colored Must Come Together and Work Together is the title of today's show. That comes from a quote from, excuse me, uh, Isaac Myers, first national black labor leader. Isaac was able uh, to start. The first thing he did was he tried to join the National Labor Union. At the time, he started a union in Baltimore for the folks that would caulk wooden ships. So when you build a wooden ship, you put tar and other stuff into the spaces between the panels so that it stays watertight. And excuse me, I'm solving another technical problem as we talk here. He got together all of the African Americans and formerly enslaved and freemen blacks who were working on the docks, and he formed a union and successfully negotiated with with the folks who owned the shipworks there and ended up negotiating so well, creating such a great negotiation technique for the caulk workers that the black workers on the docks were earning more than the white workers on the docks. That created a race riot rather than join together, which was funny because Isaac Myers offered the white dock workers the same opportunity to join the union as the black dock workers, and he was outright refused. And instead of joining together to negotiate for better wages for everyone, the white dock workers had a riot and forced a strike. But the whole point of their strike was that the black union dock workers would be fired. It wasn't their demand wasn't that they get paid more. Their demand was that that the black dock workers get fired. They were successful because what company is going to say, "Oh no, you want me to pay you less?" So they were successful, and Mr. Myers moved on to create try to join the National Labor Union, and then created the Colored National Labor Union, which went on to great success. But that's your little bit of Black history for the day. We'll probably talk about that here and there. We have panic. There's panic going around in all kinds of places today. Um, we'll talk about GiveSendGo, the platform for sending money that isn't as popular. And we'll talk about chickens, and we'll talk about the convoy. But to begin with, I'd love to bring on our guest. Let me get him on the right screen there. And welcome, Rick, Brainchild Stageworkx. Please introduce yourself, your pronouns, and what it is you do.
Hi, I'm Rick Lewis. I am, he, him are my pronouns. I'm a theater professional. I'm a director, composer, producer. I'm an artist activist, local politician, and general shitster.
You're in good company. We're both great shit stirrers. I tell you what. I don't know how we managed to do that. It doesn't take much for us to do that. I gotta say my effort for shit stirring is really at a low level. I don't put much effort into it.
It comes naturally.
It comes natural. Um, are you promoting Garreville?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Unfortunately, I don't have a place to put it.
Hmm.
So before COVID, we'd done a table reading workshop in Willingboro. We wound up doing a staged reading at the University of Penn Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. That went really well in conjunction with some work that they were doing in trying to reconcile how they received some of their display stuff. So that went really well. And then COVID happened. Came out of COVID, we did Ferryman, the ongoing plight of the Ferryman last year. And now I'm literally looking for performance space to do Garreville, but it's got to be kind of big.
Tell me a little bit more about Garreville. I know it's a musical. What's the general premise? Why was this helpful for an anthropological museum to explain the
Okay.
sources of their items?
So, and while trying to, uh, I have to be careful about what I can and cannot say about the story. Other people can say certain things, but because I wrote it and I'm the producer, there's certain things I can't say. So, with that being said, it follows a very familiar story arc in musical theater, but I took the story from its traditional setting and I set it on a Black family in the rural South circa 1915, sort of in the midst of the sharecropping era. And seeing and talking about how the country was at that point in time. And 40, 50 years out of the end of the Civil War, the end of slavery, but still the at the height of segregation and the height of um, separation in the country. There's a lot that's going on within this storyline because it's the story of a sharecropper and his family and changes and things that happened to them just before the Great Migration. Um, so there's a lot in the story about what was going on in America at that time, and a lot of things get addressed and talked about that are very typically left out of discussions of American history and Blacks' involvement in American history. So as we started bringing those things to light, and as Penn was dealing with being honest about how they achieved and got a lot of their things, it was just a big pull the blanket off of a lot of things that happened coincidentally.
Interesting. Um, sorry, I always get a little feedback from your system. Um, the so a lot of what you just said is in a little bit of shorthand, and I've begun to lose faith. So just to segue with me here a little bit, I've begun to lose faith in the what we would think of as general knowledge. I've begun to lose faith in the idea that there even exists a real zeitgeist anymore. Because as current events unfold, it constantly surprises me, and it shouldn't, I suppose, that my wife always says it shouldn't, but it constantly surprises me what people don't know, what you can't use shorthand, what you can't explain with just a phrase or a reference. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with there's been a growing separation and growing um, growing set of subcultures in the United States, I want to say. I mean, you and I, we're both members of some subcultures, and there are some subcultures that we're not both members of. We're both members of the subculture of children of the African diaspora. We're both sub members of the subculture of children of the you just referenced it. I'm sorry. The when blacks moved out of the South,
Migration.
the Great Migration. Sorry. We're both members of the theater community, the theater subculture. But there are subcultures that we're not both members of. I know very little about black metal. I know you're into black metal. I know very little about some of the things that you're interested in, and you know very little about some of the things I'm interested in. But the whole point of this, like diatribe is that it seems like there are some subcultures that exist now that are large enough that they think of themselves as the general culture, but they're not. Um, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but this is mostly white Christian culture. Like white Christian culture thinks they know what's up, and it seems like they don't really. So I bring this up. Go ahead.
They've gotten to write the story though. And not only did they get to write the story that they learn and that they believe, but they were also able to write the story for the rest of us. One of the big reasons behind me actually writing Garreville was the realization of how little American history Black people know, and how so much of what we've been taught is separated and sanitized from what actually happened. So when you look at, the different countercultures and what they know, or subcultures and what they know, and what they think they know, and things that are just accepted as fact, one of the things that I'm excited about as people become literally woke is people coming to look and examine things and examine what we know and how we know it, and what the source of information is and what the slants are. And so as we look at those things more and more, um, there is this dual increase in knowledge and lack of tolerance for bullshit.
So, I'm going to push back on that idea for a second, though, because there was just recently an editorial piece discussing the reality of the anti-wokeism moving into other cultures, to the point where the French just coined a term. I forget the exact phraseology, but it is French for the English word of woke with ism, the French suffix for ism, and they use it as a derogatory. The French culture is the source of friggin' wokeism in the first place. Like the French Revolution was the first woke movement. Like I don't understand. So anyway, but you have politicians in France, in Germany, in Canada, even accusing each other of being woke as a derogatory, and as a way of saying that they're not with the general public. How does that? How do those so that's what I'm saying. Like that's what I'm saying. You use the word woke. There's a subculture of progressivism, I want to say, in the United States, and that subculture is made up of largely working class white and black folks, who have a bit of education and exposure to both art and science. It's a middle of the road position. It's not extremism. It's not, people who are woke or agree with, the social constructs of wokeism aren't aren't like out there, demanding the death of other people. They're just, out there going, oh, hey, when you provide health care to people, they tend to die less. When you provide housing, they tend to commit less suicide. When you let people be autonomous in their medical decisions, they tend to commit less suicide and have better mental health and contribute more to the society that you want to keep running. So that all is considered wokeism, and yet there is such a huge, and it's not even a majority percentage, but there's such a self-assured subculture of and I want to say it's whiteness, but it's more than that. It's even more than whiteness. It's a subculture that thinks that they rule everything, and that
it's a subculture of supremacy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it is not necessarily It's not necessarily white supremacists. It's all supremacists. It's a subculture of thinking that
just tends to be largely white.
But there are, Islamo supremacists. There are Judeo supremacists. There are black supremacists, there are, and yeah, there are Hispanic and Latinx supremacists. There are people that have these extremist views in almost every culture. It's just they're just as small in every culture. It's just that most cultures, other than white culture, don't act like that's the default. Um, like it,
because they're not.
right? No, they're not. They're not even in white culture. Like, not that there is a white culture, but and this is a,
I'd argue that.
go ahead.
I'd say that. I mean, it's kind of like, the two types of racism. There's racism which is bias and prejudice, and there's racism which is bias and prejudice enacting in power. And both of those things exist, and it is possible for people of color to be the former sort of racism. It is not possible to be the latter. It's not possible for us to be institutional because we've never been in that position of power. But I want to get back to the question about the whole wokeism thing. Anytime there is a a label or an assignment given to a group that is trying to empower people, one of the first things that happens is those who benefit from being in power, who don't want to share that power, is they find a way to demonize the term. Um, social democratic socialism is a great example, or Black Lives Matter is a great example. Like, it wasn't long before anyone who wanted to understand what democratic socialism was could, but many chose to link that to Venezuelan and Soviet communism.
Yeah, well, I mean,
And
anti-fascism is a great example in and of itself.
is
Like,
another great example.
I
Right.
mean, that's if you want to take the first thing that they did was try and turn anti-fascism into fascism. I don't understand. It makes my brain hurt.
It's but it's the same thing that we're talking about,
Yeah.
though. Because if you take whatever's being spoken of and you make its title, you make its embodiment a negative, then, like, the concept of being awake, the concept of, like, having the blinders lifted off, the concept of seeing things for what they are. Like, I remember, like, back with the Kate Smith statue and that whole thing, and people are like, don't erase history, don't erase history. I'm like, right, no, let's not erase history. Let's tell history comprehensively, completely, and honestly, and then let's deal with it from there. And then shortly after, as people then actually begin telling honest history, then those same folks don't want people to be awake, don't want people to look at actual history. They want a narrative that is beneficial towards their cause, that is sanitized, that is um, romanticized. So when it comes to being woke, or, like, I don't care when people like Dave McCormick or Emmett Oz use it as a negative. I'm like, good. I want you to not like what I'm doing, because I don't like what you're doing, and so that means I'm on the right side of things. Because if you want to call me a member of the woke mob or whatever, to me that's just people who understand and who see and who are getting a more complete picture of who we are as a country. And there's some really cool things about America, but there's some really shitty things about America. So, like, let's look at it all so we can be honest about it, which is not something that American culture tends to do very often.
No, no, and so the reason I dove into that is because of what's happening right now with the convoy. I incorrectly, incorrectly for my own feeling of how this should go, called it a trucker convoy in my title card last week, or last show. Um, we shouldn't be calling it a trucker convoy because it's not truckers. There were like four participating truckers, actual truckers in the convoy and blockade in Ottawa. There, when people ask and look, there's very few actual truckers participating in this, and I find it amusing that the organizers of this convoy, it's that same concept. They feel that they're the default social order. They're the default society, and therefore they assume that all working class people are white and agree with white supremacy. Um, but this goes two ways. I was also in a car for a long drive with a coworker, an acquaintance, and they're white, they're Christian, they are real Christian. Like I'm not talking, like we all know white Christians that are like, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or what's her crazy face that has the guns behind her in all her pictures.
Lauren Boebert.
Lauren Boebert, right? Those aren't actual Christians, and
Right.
and I'm not a Christian, but I can tell the difference because
Right.
I
Right.
grew
Right.
up with actual Christians. Um, you know, those aren't Christians. Christians are like this coworker of mine. Um, they care about other people. They really do. They really actually care internally and viscerally about other people. They care whether those other people are doing well, both in the current realm and in what to me is a fictional future that, yeah, that doesn't exist, but they believe in it, and they actually care what happens to other people in that fictional future. Um, but this person's internal monologue didn't allow for the understanding that there are other subcultures interacting in politics right now, and those other subcultures don't all work the same way that his does. Um, and so he didn't know, for instance, that the organizer of the convoy in Canada is a literal Nazi. Like, no bones about it. Literal Nazi, has Nazi paraphernalia. Talks about the extermination of the Jews. Talks about the reinstatement of the instatement of a Fourth Reich. Talks about white supremacy, and this is all public. It's like, if you look the guy's name up, it just comes up with YouTube videos of him talking about this stuff, and I don't understand. So, I broached that topic when the convoy came up, and I was like, I'm sorry, I have no support for the convoy, and for the blockading and protests, as they call it, mask mandates in Canada. And he was like, "Why isn't it at least useful to establish freedom of speech?" And I'm like, "Sure, it's useful to establish freedom of speech, but anytime you're in an organization with a literal Nazi, you have to question if what the rest of that sentence is. You know, like as soon as you get in bed with a Nazi, you are a Nazi. Like it's not if you provide support and succor and comfort to the efforts of a Nazi, you're on the wrong side of whatever issue it is. Like it is.
But did he know that the guy was a Nazi?
No, no.
You know, and like I had conversations back with people in 2018 when Arthur Jones won the Republican primary for Senate in no, I'm sorry, for his House district in Illinois. Arthur Jones is another like avowed, like goose stepping, card carrying, Holocaust denying Nazi, like unquestionably. And he won the Republican primary in Illinois and got another 25,000 votes or so in the general. Um, and so there were a bunch of people who didn't know he was a Nazi. There's a bunch of people, and again, like you're saying, it's obvious, it's out there, the material's out there, you can find it, it's not hard. Um, but then there were also people who just didn't care because, you know, freedom of speech, saying at least some of the things that I agree with and that I would like to say, when people's points and perceptions are validated, they tend to care a lot less about who it is that's validating, regardless of where they land historically or ideologically. And I think that that's one of the things that happens a lot in cases like this. You know, when people talk about the convoy, most people talk about mask mandates, and most people talk about how, you know, there's all these truckers who can't do their job and they can't deliver things because they have to wear the masks, and that's why we have, you know, Joe. That's why we have, you know, Joe Biden's in the White House and he's screwing everything up and all of those sorts of things. And so they have their ideologies and they have their candles that they want to burn. And so the little snippets and little tidbits that they get from coverage of the convoy or the blockage or whatever you want to call it, um, the little bit that they get that makes the Venn diagram with what they believe and what they think, like that's all they know and that's all they need to know and that's all they want to know. It's like they agree with me this much. So all of the things that lay outside of that, Elon Musk's involvement and all of that doesn't matter to them.
What, but why doesn't that matter? So on the YouTube channel, a friend of the channel, Jake, commented, "If you're sharing the same flag, you're on the same team, like it or not." And that's it's kind of where I've always come from, and where like how do you not look into so like I'll give a personal example here. Beginning of the pandemic. You know, it was rather selfishly, but it was selfish, but rather selfishly against shutting down travel. You know, I was located internationally at the time, and I, in general, believe in freedom of movement. I think that there shouldn't be borders, basically, but that's neither here nor there. You know, but I'm a big proponent of freedom of movement, freedom of individual movement. You know, you should be able to go where you want to go, when you want to go there, and regardless of who you are or where you're from or what your social class and standing is. So at the beginning of the pandemic, when you know we were talking about, oh, we need to shut down the borders, um, I found myself in agreement suddenly with statements coming out of the former guy. You know, I found myself in agreement with the statement, hey, you know, the cure can't be worse than the disease. should we look at how bad the disease is before we start taking drastic measures to shut down everything? Um, and um, I I follow what I would call the loose scientific method in my own life. I have a hypothesis, a position, a thought, a feeling, and then I examine that against the available evidence, and then I figure out what whether that hypothesis is correct or incorrect, and then I move forward from there. So you know you
You realize that's a lot more steps than the average brain can or will take.
but that's what I'm saying. Like, what is it? Should it be like? Didn't we all learn this process in school?
Okay, so all right, so I'm not a religious person, but I used to be. There used to be this story about this guy he's like a rich landowner sort of dude, and he's going away on a trip. And he gives one dude like 5 bunches of money and says, do something with it. Another person, 3, do something with it. Another person, 1. The guy who had the 5 goes out and doubles everything. Guy comes back, great job. I'll, give you more stuff. Guy who had 3 went out and doubled things. He says the same thing. Great job. You did it. I'll do more. The guy with 1 was afraid of blowing it. So he took it and he buried it. And the boss was like, dude, you suck. You could have at least like let it sit in the bank. You suck. You're fired. Get out of here. And the reason that I bring that up in this conversation is in a lot of ways, when it comes to looking at the world that we live in and how things unfold and how things work, we have to be honest about the fact that some people just aren't that complicated. And some people, like, what comes easily to you as far as sequential thinking, doesn't come as easily to some people, and we just kind of have to own that and the responsibility that comes with it. But then also realize that there's other people for whom it might come that easily, but they just don't have that kind of energy or effort, or with what life is doing with them, they don't have that kind of time.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, all right. So I do that all the time, especially for fellow people of color. I give people a lot of room. I've said this before. Like, I will never argue with a black man about vaccinations. You don't want to get vaccinated because you don't trust the government and science, and you know about all the experimentation that's happened on black people, especially. And I won't argue with a black woman either about this because black women, women of color, have been experimented on and are still being experimented on by the medical community, and are not served by the medical community the same way that even black men are served by the medical community. Black women are denied their pain. They're denied their own understanding of their own condition. They're denied, you know, that feeling of self assuredness that oftentimes we black men walk around with, because if we say something to somebody, not 100% of the time will they listen to us, but a lot of the time people will listen and go, hey, you're probably right, this is what you're talking about. Um, and so, I will, I give a lot of leeway, but the problem is that giving that leeway on an individual level is fine. Giving that leeway on a gross level, on a societal level, I don't think is possible. And then we get into the argument of, is that fascism? Is that fascism to enforce the wiser and more analyzed viewpoint on the general public, just because it is ostensibly correct, or it's correct as far as all the people who do all that thinking process of having a hypothesis and analyzing it. Those people have done it, and they've come up with the fact that you should not allow your dog to defecate on the street and then just leave it there. You should clean it up, and that stops disease from spreading. Or you should not put your shoes on the table in a public cafeteria because that will stop disease from spreading as easily. By the way, I'm about to go on a rant about all the things that we already do to follow health codes and how wearing a mask isn't that big a deal. Like you should probably wear a shirt when you go into an eating establishment because that both stops you from getting burned by food and also protects other people from your the greater majority of your skin sloughing off into their food. Um, yeah. Anyway. Uh, yeah.
So
Go ahead.
so in all of that, like I'm a big believer in individual liberty. Big believer. One of the cool things about living what would generally be considered an alternative lifestyle is that I've been able to look at my life and say, okay, these are the things that I want to do, and these are the way I want to live with the people that are around me and that are consenting and supportive and all those sorts of things. So I'm not going to tell anybody what they can do in their house because I don't want anybody telling me what I can do in my house. However, when we intersect and interact as a society, a lot of those rules change. One of the things that I love to point out people, who talk about constitutional rights and masks and bullshit like that, I'm like, okay, um, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. Like in the Constitution, it's very clear that one of the things that the government is supposed to do is to keep us all safe and to keep us all within general welfare. Like that's in the Constitution that these people so frequently bray about. So,
Without understanding it.
right. And so when it comes to it, like, is it fascism to say, put your shirt on, put your mask on, you should get vaccinated? I don't find that to be fascism. Now, if we were knocking down doors and putting needles into people's arms, that's a very different thing. The gray area tends to come with the consequences. When people say, you're forcing people to get it by telling them they can't come to work. No, it's like we operate as a society and we have rules that we agree upon as a society. And most of us say, we have these health officials, we elect these representatives, we put these people in places of power and leadership with the hope that they are going to do all of those things that the Constitution lists. Once they do that, we can all decide whether or not we, as individuals, we have the freedom to decide whether or not we're going to abide by those societal rules put in place. If you decide that you are going to go into a restaurant with no shoes and no shirt, part of the societal contract is that they can kick you out. If you decide that you're going to rob banks, part of the societal contract is that you can be imprisoned. So,
I mean, sure, you can rob a bank. So yeah, let's talk about freedom. Yeah, absolutely. You can rob a bank. You have the freedom to choose to rob a bank today if you want to.
right,
There are consequences for that choice. You
exactly.
will likely lose. You will likely get caught. You will likely lose your job. You will likely
Lose your freedom.
lose your freedom. So I mean, just the point is valid, and I want to draw it right directly back to this convoy thing, because you had a bunch of people saying that the enforcement of moving the convoy was anti-freedom of speech. Um, Oddly, the same people that are okay with a bunch of Black Lives Matter people getting run over in the street,
Of
or
course.
who did drive a car into me through an intersection. But that's neither here nor there. Um,
No, no, that's exactly there.
I know.
That's
I know, I'm saying it facetiously. I use sarcasm a lot, folks. I'm sorry. It's just a habit. Um, yeah, it's not the consequences of me counter protesting and a reopen car convoy were that I got run over in the street. Like, that's a direct consequence. I also faced other consequences, like having white supremacists come by my house and threaten me. But yeah, those are all consequences, and there are that. Yeah, it's completely freedom for me to counter protest their movement. It's also freedom for them to come to my house and threaten me. There are consequences to that, though. People seem to not understand that there's no stopping of the like. Did I mean, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. I remember a show called 321 Contact. Do we not remember the theme song? Like, did that not impact enough people? For every action there is a reaction. For everything you do there is a consequence. You're.
that something that I've come to realize. Um, so I grew up in Philly. I grew up at the north end of Broad Street. Lived all over Philly. Um, but now I live in the woods
Mhm.
in New Jersey. I'm like, my town makes me officially a piney.
Yeah. My
Um,
apologies for all of
I'm the
that, by
only,
the way.
there's upsides, there's downsides. I blame the wife. That's why I came out here. But in in it's weird. I'm the only black elected official in this town ever. And in a town that one generation ago still had written in the deeds that houses couldn't be sold to blacks and Jews. So being in this town has, given me some perspective on things. One of them being that certain consequences, and the way people look at actions and reactions has an awful lot to do with whether or not those things have ever specifically affected their life. So the concept of somebody telling your average white American that you can't go to work when going to work, choosing their job, getting their pay, going on vacation, having their 401k, all of those things are an essential and quintessential part of their existence. Like, being held responsible for their actions and having negative consequences to their actions are things that never happened before.
I mean, you're not wrong. I laugh because you're so correct. Like that's fascinating to me. That's fascinating that people and again, these are the same people that will complain to no end about cancel culture and complain to no end about at the same time as you're complaining about cancel culture, out the other side of your mouth you're talking about everybody being a snowflake and everybody being awarded an award when they were younger and participation trophies, and the ultimate participation trophy for most of the folks that are having these insane reactions. I'm sorry, I'm using the word insane incorrectly, but these wild reactions to just the barest consequence for their actions are the same people that think that, that an actual participation trophy in, high school ruined the future for everybody in Gen Z.
Because when I was in high school, they didn't give out anything, but I pulled myself up and I was able to, with a loan, a co-sign loan from my parents, was able to pull myself up by my own bootstraps, and I didn't have to go and take out these loans because my parents took them out for me. And so again, there's this perspective.
And then I got a job where the job paid off those loans. Even though I wasn't earning that much money, the job just paid them off for me. I don't understand why they paid them off for me, but they paid them off.
Right. Or I didn't have to get a job because my dad has a company, and like I, came out of college and went straight to work for him. Right. So as there's a disconnect that winds up happening from experiences. It's the whole privilege discussion. When people don't realize the power of obstacles they didn't have to overcome. And it's the same kind of thing with consequence. When people don't, their experience crafts their reality, and they are either unable or unwilling to acknowledge the fact that there are other realities.
So real quick, I wanna talk about the results of this. When the reality impacts your microcosm reality, and you've grown up in this cloistered methodology where you don't have consequences to what happens, or you don't even realize that you don't actually have those sort of consequences. What happens is panic. And that's what's happening right now for a lot of people. A lot of people are panicking. Why are they panicking? Well, we'll do a big example and a little example. A big example would be that GiveSendGo, the fundraising platform that the folks who wanted to funnel money into the convoy protests slash actions slash whatever you want to call them, they're a quote unquote Christian giving network. They basically act like GoFundMe, but for mostly right wing things. And they are run by a person who is not very good at programming or information security. So over the course of the last 3 or 4 days, several things have happened. GiveSendGo's databases were compromised and it's not even really compromised. So let's get this straight. When you have a lot of information on the internet, and you need to collect that information and work with it all the time, 99% of everybody uses somebody else's computers to do all that processing, because you can't set up a computer in a cage in a colo anymore and expect it to handle a lot of traffic. So you get an Amazon Web Services account, and you use Amazon's computers. And as with anything else, when you're using somebody's computer, you need passwords, you need a way to protect the traffic going back and forth between your computer and their computer. And you also need greater access, a level of access where you can actually see everything if you're the programmer. The person who created GiveSendGo basically left their passwords out in the open to both sides of this interconnect, and so people were able to just use those passwords that were public to log into the accounts of GiveSendGo. So it's not a leak. It's not a theft. It wasn't hacking, so to speak. Uh,
It was an open door.
it was an open door, and all the information that anybody had ever sent to GiveSendGo, including passport photos, driver's license photos, names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, credit card numbers, and the amounts that they wanted to pledge to and who they pledged them to, were all sitting on a table inside of just inside of an open door that literally everyone in the world walks past every day. Um, yeah, so there you go. And so the that all that information, somebody picked it up, and was like, "Hey, anybody lose this?" And yeah, a bunch of people had all their information shared on the internet. Um, so what what this means is practically nothing. If GiveSendGo was just say GoFundMe, or these folks were just supporting, say, somebody who wanted a hip replacement, um, it doesn't really matter. You know, the information probably wouldn't have even gone out there as public, other than to say, "Hey, all your information is out here in public," because that happens all the time. You know, I've had my information stolen from American Airlines account was the American Airlines database was hacked, and my name and email address and any other information saved with my American Airlines account was made public. It's out there on the dark web. You know, so
That's why I don't save shit.
but point being, there are no consequences to me having an American Airlines account. You know, nobody cares. Uh, uh, However, folks that are panicking over the GiveSendGo information becoming public because somewhere inside they realize that there are consequences for supporting white nationalist movements and various causes that aren't socially acceptable in reality. They just act like they are. Um, a member of the Department of Justice, for instance, was found to have publicly contributed to GiveSendGo using their DOJ email address and from DOJ computers, because the IP addresses of all these interactions with the website were made public as well. Um, so now people are like, well, they shouldn't face any consequences for that. It's just free speech. Free speech has consequences. No matter what speech you're freely engaging in, it has consequences. My free speech has consequences, even though I'm speaking things that ostensibly most people should be in agreement with. I'm trying not to offend anyone. I'm not intentionally offending one or doing something that is negative. I'm not promoting the death of anyone or burning books or anything like that. Um, Yet I face consequences all the time. I face the consequence of possibly losing out on jobs. I face the consequence of, you know, people showing up at my house, quite literally, to threaten my life. You know, there are consequences to free speech, whether that speech is appropriate or not.
Most most people, when they think of what it means to be an American, and I'll say it, particularly most white people, and I'm making a very broad brush,
Mm.
but when they think of what it means to be an American and when they think of what freedom means and freedom of speech, um, consequences aren't part of the bargain. They just aren't. Because typically, historically, Either there haven't been consequences at all, or consequences are much, much less than they are for the rest of the country. So there's very much a what happens to us versus what happens to them mindset. And so when people look at things like the convoy and they'll throw the term freedom of speech, or they'll say, what happened to freedom of speech? But then, like you said, 2 minutes later, they'll want BLM shut down, or they'll hate, can you believe in a halftime show somebody said, I don't like the popo? So the freedom of speech, or the freedom to be able to, and I think that's it. Freedom of speech to them means freedom of speaking without consequence. Like that's what those two things mean. And so when there's a freedom of speech, but yes, there's consequences, the cognitive dissonance like clicks in and they don't know what to do with it. When freedom of, like when body autonomy comes and it goes against their relationship with their air god for somebody to get an abortion, then they're doing the right and righteous thing by obeying their air god, telling people not to get an abortion. But the second that you tell them that they should get vaccinated or that they should wear a mask, especially the moment it becomes something that's mandated,
My body, my choice. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Then the same argument doesn't, and it's not that they believe less in the overall concept of body autonomy. It's that nobody's ever told them that they can't be autonomous with their body, or at least that's what they believe. Never mind the fact that kids have been like having to get vaccinated to go to public school for decades and all of that kind of shit. And the shoe shirt service thing. But when it comes to a consequence that they don't like, that's when we have a problem. Because people will say all the time, oh, you don't like the way they treat you at your job? Get a new job. But those same people won't do the, oh, you don't like that they're telling you have to wear a mask at work? Get a new job.
Right. So,
Because it's all about where the consequences lie.
yeah, whose consequence is it? A small example, and I just wanted to bring this up before we go. A small example is that the entire Trump regime is panicking, and Trump's statement that he released yesterday is hilarious to read. If you want to see comedy, true comedy in action, go read Trump's statement about his accountants quitting him. For those that don't know, Trump has used an accounting firm for the past 25 years or so that is relatively famous for handling high profile accounting. And when accountants work at that level, they are the ones that actually control your books. Well, they read your books and then sign off on them as being correct. And Trump's accounting team 3 days ago put out a statement that they were no longer servicing Trump's account, and that the statements for the past 10 years they no longer have any. They're unsigning as those statements being valid. This has caused wild panic. Every appearance by any Trump person in the past few days has been just comedic gold. And this is comedic gold of the Schadenfreude type, but so it may not be your taste, but boy, do I love it. Yeah. So small example of consequences and panic, sudden consequences leading to panic. Just one other thing that we didn't cover today that I wanted to tell everyone because it's not really out there in the news. So I always try and help people identify things that they haven't seen on the news. The Tyson Foods, where is this? The Food and Drug Administration detected bird flu, a highly virulent form of the H4N1 bird flu, in a flock of 240,000 chickens owned by Tyson Foods in Kentucky. So they're going to cull that herd of birds, but just so y'all know, that's pretty dangerous. Bird flu. This type of bird flu is the type that goes H5N1, excuse me, that goes directly between humans and avians, and yeah, yeah, we have an outbreak of bird flu in the United States. So, you know, sure, don't wear a mask. It's fine. It's fine. Your body, your choice. Something I don't know. I get
If
lost.
only that would effectively like do some Darwinistic shit. But the problem is there's a whole bunch of like innocent people that get caught up in that net as well. Like if all it did, like if everyone who was like no masks and masks are fascism and all, like I'd be like, you do you, boo. But like those aren't the only ones who are going
Yeah.
to get infected and
Um,
who are going to die.
yeah. That's the big problem is that unfortunately eugenics doesn't actually work. All right. So on that note, thank you, Rick, for joining me today and talking random topics. I really enjoyed today's show. There's a little more local news if anybody's interested in sticking around. I just recognize that it's 10 after, so I know people have lots to do. Feel free to join us again next week. We'll have another fine show for you with another guest. And hopefully, it looks like we're going to have Argent Combat next week as our guest. And hopefully, you'll be able to join us 10 a.m. Wednesday. And join us. You know, we talk about fun stuff. I think we're better than Joe Rogan's podcast. I don't know. Maybe not. I do say a lot. I was watching my replay the other day, and I was like, "Oh, this is why I don't watch replays of myself." um, yeah. So there you go. There you have it, folks. Please, if you like what you've seen, hit the like button on whatever outlet you're watching us on. We have YouTube, we have Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, Periscope, Mob Crush. You can hit a like button on any of those platforms. You can hit subscribe. You can join us every week. You'll get a notification. You can even watch us on your cell phone while you're doing something else. It's a fun time. Thanks, Rick. And so I'm going to say bye to Rick. I'm going to bring myself up on screen there. Really appreciate it. Appreciate all my guests. And please, like I said, join us next week. Just to cover a little couple of little pieces of information that we didn't make it into the main body of the broadcast there. Philadelphia is changing its vaccination rules for restaurants and venues. They're going to go with a tiered system based on current data. So basically, they have not yet, but they will be issuing basically self-guidance system for should we be wearing masks, should we not be in restaurants unless we have masks and proof of vaccination, should we just be okay with a negative test within the past couple of days, etc., or should we just not be wearing masks or caring about whether anybody is in of the restaurant without being vaccinated. And they'll be releasing that within the next couple of weeks here. It's going to be based on number of cases in recency, and it's going to be based on whether or not those cases are virulent, etc. The most recent news is that Philadelphia is experiencing about 357 new COVID cases per day. It's still a lot, folks. But it's down 88% from when the vaccine mandate went into effect on January 3rd. So Omicron may have run its course. Anyway, another piece of news that we didn't get to. Police in Pensacola, Florida, abused a family, including literally dropping an infant on his face, and then not allowing the child to go to healthcare when the medics that were on scene asked to take the child to the hospital. They refused. And so there's an internal investigation. I don't know what good internal investigation does at that point, but whatever. That's a whole mess. He's a 1 year old, and he was dropped on his face in the care of the Pensacola police. Um, yeah, and then refused health care. Um, that's just it's sickening. Anyway, we'll see what happens with the internal investigation. I'm sure they'll find they're not at fault, but then we'll see what happens with the private case. A jury found the New York Times not liable in Palin versus New York Times and James Bennett. Reporter James Bennett had incorrectly reported some information about Sarah Palin. Before Sarah Palin asked for an apology, the New York Times editors had already the next day asked Mr. Bennett to withdraw his remarks and had published an apology and a retraction. And then Sarah Palin sued the New York Times recently, and in that case, both the jury and the judge found that there was no liability, no cause for action here. A news agency publishing something and then immediately publishing a retraction unprovoked when they found out that their facts were wrong is not cause for libel or slander. So that's that. Thanks, Sarah, for showing up in your 15 minutes of fame again. So yeah, we covered the bird flu. We covered everything else going on right now. I'm sure there's a lot. Oh, one more thing. In Spokane, Washington, the Democratic headquarters 2 days ago, on the 9th, sorry, that's more than 2 days ago now, almost a week ago, the Democratic headquarters in Spokane, Washington, was the site of an attempted bombing, and that literally didn't make the news at all. So yeah, we have political bombings going on in the United States again, and Facebook is harboring right-wing pastor Greg Locke. Even though plenty of people have reported his Facebook page for hate speech and his Facebook live streams for hate speech, he continues to be allowed to have a Facebook page. And apparently, literally saying that people of color are dangerous and burning books based on the ideas contained within them is not hate speech according to Facebook. Great. Because, I've been banned from Facebook for hate speech for saying something as innocuous as the word white followed by people. Uh, White people. All right. Thanks everybody for sticking around. Really appreciate your viewership. If you like what you see, please consider donating to our Patreon, patreon.com/LightThiefProductions. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, MobCrush, Periscope. Periscope, by the way, is de-emphasized. It's part of Twitter now. And so if you follow us on Twitter, you'll get our live stream notifications there as well every week. We're also going to probably start publishing again to local news magazine, and so look out for that. Please, everyone, I know the news is bad sometimes, but at least try and enjoy the rest of your week. See you next week, everybody.